Ever feel like you've got just a pile of information staring back at you, maybe articles, reports, or just this nagging curiosity?
Yeah, and you're searching for that, real solid understanding.
Exactly. Like you need a shortcut, right? To get to the core insights without getting totally lost in all the details.
Well, that's pretty much what we try to do here on the deep dive.
Yeah, we take those mountains of material and try to pull out the most valuable nuggets for you.
And today, that mountain, so to speak, it comes in the form of a document with a rather academic-sounding title, 001 Missiological Research Design.pdf.
Okay, missiological research design. But stick with us here because while it might sound super scholarly, the principles inside are actually surprisingly relevant. Relevant for anyone who really wants to understand complex topics and, avoid getting tripped up by how we gather and interpret information.
Totally. Think of it like a peek behind the curtain, seeing how solid research is actually built.
Right. Our mission today is basically to pull out the key building blocks from this text, the essential bits of designing a good investigation, and make them clear and useful for you, no matter what your background is.
We want to give you a sharper way to approach information in your own life.
Okay, so let's dive in. The document starts off talking about something called the central research issue. What is that? Why does it matter so much?
Well, in simple terms, the central research issue is the main question you're trying to answer, or maybe the core problem you're trying to solve.
Okay.
It's really the absolute starting point for any serious investigation. Doesn't matter if you're a student doing a project or just, someone trying to figure out a complex situation at work.
Right.
And the document, it really hammers home how crucial this is. Your central research issue. Think of it as the number one filter for all the information you encounter.
A filter? How so?
Well, if an idea doesn't directly help you answer that core question, it's probably a distraction. Mastering this focus. Well, it can cut through information overload like nothing else. This central issue, it acts like a backbone for the whole investigation. It guides every single decision you make. How you design the research, what methods you pick, how you analyze what you find, and ultimately the conclusions you reach.
So it sounds like if you don't really nail this at the start, everything else could just go off the rails.
Absolutely. And the document points out pinning down this central research issue is often the hardest part.
Really? Harder than the research itself?
Often, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's not just picking a general area you're interested in. It involves really, refining your focus.
Okay.
You need to narrow your topic down, make it manageable, something you can actually investigate properly with the time and resources you have.
Makes sense.
And ideally something that connects to what you already know or genuinely care about. You also need to clearly state why you're doing this. What's the purpose? And what specific goals do you hope to achieve?
Okay, so it's not just saying, I want to learn about climate change. It's much more specific.
Yeah, way more specific. More like, I want to understand the impact of local policy X on carbon emissions in my city over the last 5 years so that I can advocate for more effective environmental regulations. See the difference?
Yeah, much clearer purpose and goal.
Exactly. And then you get to the core of it. What exactly is the problem you're looking at? Or what's the main argument, the thesis you're testing?
That's the problem statement or thesis.
Got it. From there, you break it down. More specific research questions or hypotheses, which the document mentions, kind of depends on whether you're taking a more exploratory qualitative approach or trying to test a specific theory, quantitatively.
And setting boundaries.
Oh, definitely. Finally, you need to define the scope. What are you including? And just as importantly, what are you deliberately leaving out? Setting those boundaries is key.
Okay. The document also mentions that a well-defined central research issue helps with continuity, sequence, and integration. How does that work?
Well, because that central question acts as your constant reference point, your North Star, if you like.
Okay.
Every piece of information you gather, every method you use, it should somehow link back to answering that core question. That's your continuity.
Right.
It also helps you organize the whole thing logically. Right. Each step builds on the last one, moving you closer to an answer that's the sequence part. And ultimately, it ensures that all the different parts, what you read, what you do, what you find, it all comes together to give you a cohesive, meaningful understanding. That's integration.
This isn't just for formal academic papers, is it?
Not at all.
I can totally see how this applies if I'm just trying to figure out, say, why my website traffic suddenly dropped.
Exactly.
What's the core question I'm trying to answer there? What are the limits of what I'm going to look into?
Precisely. Whether it's a huge academic project or just a personal puzzle you're trying to solve, starting with that sharply defined central question is, honestly, your best tool for staying focused and not drowning in information.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got our main question figured out. The next thing the document brings up is precedent research. Sounds like looking into what other people have already discovered.
That's basically it, yeah. Precedent research is all about digging into the existing knowledge that relates to your central research issue. It's kind of like checking the maps before you set off on a big journey.
Okay, checking the maps.
But the real key insight here, according to the document, isn't just to, read what others have done, is to actively look for the gaps.
Gaps?
Yeah, and maybe even the flaws in their understanding or their methods, those gaps and flaws. They're often the most fertile ground for your own investigation, your own potential breakthroughs.
Okay, so it's not just about summarizing what's already known, it's more critical than that.
Way more critical. The document really emphasizes that you need to critically evaluate the work that's already out there. You got to ask, how reliable were their methods? Are their conclusions actually well supported by the data they presented? Were there limitations to their study that they maybe didn't fully acknowledge? Building your own understanding on a solid foundation is just crucial.
The document uses an interesting example about the Turkana people in Kenya. How does that illustrate the value of looking at precedent research?
Oh yeah, the Turkana example. It shows how looking at research from a completely different fields like ecology, anthropology, even economics could inform a really specific question. In that case, it was about how receptive the Turkana might be to a particular message or idea.
So not just looking at past religious studies.
Exactly. By understanding their environment, their social structures, their economic reality stuff from all these different angles, researchers could develop more informed hypotheses, better predictive theories about their potential openness to new perspectives.
Right. It pulled together insights from lots of disciplines to build a more complete picture.
That's the idea. Seeing your question from multiple angles by looking at what different kinds of experts have already figured out or tried to figure out.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the document also warns about some common mistakes when people do this precedent research. What should we be watching out for?
Yeah, there are definitely pitfalls. One really big one is taking quotes or findings out of their original context just to make them support your own point. That's sometimes called proof texting.
Yeah. Cherry picking.
Kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah.
You really need to be careful to represent other people's work accurately and fairly. Another huge one is giving credit where credit is due.
Plagiarism.
Exactly. The document highlights plagiarism in various forms, not just copying word for word, but also patching together sentences from different sources without citation, or even lifting someone's really unique turn of phrase without acknowledging them.
Right.
Proper citation isn't just some dusty academic rule. It's really about intellectual honesty. Basic ethics.
Absolutely. We're all standing on the shoulders of others, right? It's vital to acknowledge that. What else? Any other common errors?
Let's see. Another common trap is confusing what you find in your precedent research. What others have found with your own original discoveries or findings.
Blurring the lines.
Yeah. What others found is the background, the foundation. Your work builds on that. It doesn't just repeat it. The document also cautions against simply summarizing previous research instead of actually analyzing and evaluating it.
So engage with the ideas, don't just list them.
Right. You need to show you understand it and have thought critically about it. And surprisingly, maybe, some people might give more weight to a study just because of the author's big name or reputation, rather than judging the actual strength of the research itself.
Right, the authority bias.
Could be. And finally, a really key mistake is not using your review of existing knowledge to properly justify why your central research issue is important, or why it still needs investigating, or failing to use it to clearly define the scope of your own investigation based on what's come before.
That makes total sense. Your look at what's already out there should really explain why your specific question still needs to be asked. Precisely. So how can our listeners, apply this when they're just trying to learn something new day to day?
Well, think about it. When you're reading articles online or looking into a new topic, how do you assess the information you're finding? Are you just accepting it at face value?
Good question.
Or are you asking critical questions? Like, where did this come from? What's the source? If it's based on research, what methods did they use? Are there potential biases here? Are you connecting what you're reading to other things you already know, trying to synthesize it?
Yeah.
Understanding these principles of precedent research
Mm.
just encourages you to be a more uh, active and discerning consumer of information, not just passively absorbing stuff.
Okay, so we've got our question, we've looked carefully at what others have said. Now we need to figure out how to actually find the answer ourselves. That's where research methods come in, is that right?
Exactly. Research methods are the specific tools and techniques you use to collect and analyze your information, your data. And the document really emphasizes the best methods are always the ones most appropriate for your specific central research issue.
Different questions need different tools.
You got it.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, the document categorizes research into descriptive, experimental, or evaluative.
Can you give us a quick rundown of those?
Sure. So, descriptive research, it basically aims to paint a picture of a situation or a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's about describing what is happening or what has happened.
Like surveys or a historical account.
Exactly. Think of surveys describing people's opinions, or historical research describing past events, or maybe ethnographic studies describing a culture. Then you have experimental research.
Okay.
That's more about testing cause and effect.
Okay.
You deliberately manipulate one thing, what researchers call a variable, to see its impact on another thing, often in a controlled setting.
Controlled setting. That sounds important.
Right.
Why the control?
Well, control is really key because you want to be as sure as possible that the changes you observe are actually due to the thing you manipulated and not because of some other random factor.
Right.
Imagine testing a new teaching method in a classroom. You'd want to try and keep other things constant, like maybe class size, time of day, so you can be more confident that any difference in learning outcomes is actually due to the new method, not something else.
Makes sense. And the third type, evaluative.
Right, evaluative research. That focuses on assessing the value or the effectiveness of something like a program, a policy, an intervention. It's about making judgments based on evidence.
Gotcha. Okay, the document also talks a lot about validity and reliability. We hear those words thrown around. What do they really mean in practice?
Good question. They're fundamental. So validity, in simple terms, means you're actually measuring what you intend to measure.
Okay.
Imagine trying to measure intelligence by measuring someone's height. That ruler might be reliable, it gives consistent height measurements, but it's not a valid way to measure intelligence.
Right. Wrong tool for the job.
Exactly. Reliability, on the other hand, means your method is consistent. If you use the same method multiple times under the same conditions, will you get similar results?
Consistency.
Right. A good research method, ideally, should be both valid, measuring the right thing, and reliable, doing it consistently. Think of a bathroom scale. A good one gives you an accurate weight reading that's validity and gives you roughly the same reading if you step on and off it a few times. That's reliability.
And I guess there can be threats to both of those, things that can mess up your results.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
The document lists quite a few. There are tons of factors that can affect whether your research is truly measuring what it should, that's internal validity, or whether your findings can be generalized to other situations, external validity, and factors affecting consistency, reliability.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For internal validity, maybe something happens in the world while you're doing your study that affects your participants, like a major news event. Yeah. That could influence your results in a way you didn't intend. For external validity, maybe the specific group you studied is very different from the broader population, so your findings don't really apply elsewhere. Okay. Or for reliability, maybe the questions on your survey are ambiguous, so different people interpret them differently each time. That affects consistency. Careful planning is needed to minimize these threats.
This is all making me think about how even in, like, everyday problem solving, say, if I'm trying to figure out why a marketing campaign worked or didn't work, I need to be careful about whether I'm looking at the right numbers, the right metrics, that's validity, right? And whether my way of analyzing that data is consistent reliability.
Absolutely. These concepts aren't just for formal academic research. Anytime you're trying to draw conclusions based on information, thinking about whether your approach is sound and whether your results are consistent is just crucial.
Okay, right. So let's say we've done the research, we've used our methods, we've gathered our data carefully. Now we need to make sense of it all. The document talks about findings, conclusions, and recommendations. How are they different?
Yeah, the document is really clear about this distinction, and it's important. Your findings should simply be a report of what you discovered that directly relates back to your central research issue.
Just the facts.
Pretty much. It's about presenting the evidence, the data, without adding your interpretation yet. And it stresses crucially that you have an ethical responsibility to report all the relevant findings, even the ones that maybe don't support what you initially thought or hoped you'd find.
That's integrity right there.
Absolutely. And importantly, the findings section itself should not include your opinions, your conclusions, or what you think the findings mean. That comes later.
Okay, so findings are just the what? What comes next?
Conclusions. That's where you step back and interpret the findings. What do these results actually mean in relation to your central research issue? What insights have you gained?
So what?
Exactly. And then, based on those conclusions, you might offer recommendations. These are the logical next steps or actions that you suggest, based only on your conclusions, which, remember, are based only on your findings.
So there's a clear chain. Findings lead to conclusions, lead to recommendations.
Precisely. And it all has to tie back, consistently, to that original central research issue you started with. No tangents allowed, really.
Keeps everything focused.
It does. The document also makes a good point about the importance of clear and simple writing when you're presenting all this. Avoid jargon where you can. Use things like headings, bullet points, maybe even charts and graphs effectively. They can make complex findings much easier for others to grasp.
Visuals. But you need to be careful with those too, right?
Definitely. The document touches on this. How you present data visually matters. For example, the same data plotted on a simple bar chart versus, say, a logarithmic scale graph could potentially lead someone to a different interpretation if they're not careful. So you want to choose visuals that accurately represent the findings and don't unintentionally mislead. It's an ethical consideration in presentation.
Good point. And the conclusions and recommendations, they have to be directly supported by those findings, right? You can't just leap to some grand conclusion that isn't really backed up by the data you presented.
Exactly right. Your conclusions are constrained by what your findings actually show, and also by the limitations of your study, like how generalizable the results are. And any recommendations you make must logically follow from those grounded conclusions. It's a step-by-step process. Discovery, interpretation, application.
Okay. Now, this document is about missiological research design. That sounds like it would often involve looking at things from, well, a lot of different angles: culture, belief, history. The document mentions interdisciplinary approaches. Why is that so important in this field, and maybe others too?
Yeah, that's a key point. Understanding something as complex as people's beliefs, their cultures, how they interact, how ideas spread, it almost always requires insights from various fields of study.
Because one field alone doesn't capture the whole picture.
Pretty much. Think of it like trying to understand, I don't know, a complex ecosystem. You need biology, chemistry, geology, maybe even climatology. Similarly, missiological research often needs to draw on theology, sociology, anthropology, history, linguistics, communication studies, psychology, maybe more.
Wow. Okay, so it's about bringing all these different areas of expertise together.
Exactly. To get a fuller, more holistic picture. The document uses this great analogy of a multi-storied house.
A multi-storied house.
Yeah, the idea is that you need to look through different academic windows, the windows of sociology, anthropology, theology, etc., to really see what's happening on each level of this complex human reality.
I like that analogy.
It also mentions the classic fable of the blind man and the elephant. Each man touches a different part of the trunk, the leg, the tail, and thinks that's the whole elephant.
Right. Each has a piece of the truth, but not the whole thing.
Exactly. An interdisciplinary approach helps you try and piece together a more complete understanding of the elephant, recognizing that complex issues usually require multiple perspectives.
The document gives some examples of how different fields contribute, like education, communication, history, anthropology. Can you give us just a quick flavor of that? What do they bring?
Sure. So from, say, education, you might borrow methods for understanding how people learn, how values are transmitted, how effective teaching happens. From communication studies, you might use models like Laswell's Who Says What to Whom in Which Channel with What Effect to analyze message transmission.
Okay.
History obviously provides crucial context. It helps you understand how current situations came to be, looking at sources critically. Anthropology offers powerful tools like participant observation and ethnographic interviewing to understand cultures from the inside, the emic perspective, as they call it.
Right, the insider view versus the outsider view.
Exactly. Each field brings its own specialized tools, its own ways of asking questions and gathering evidence that can enrich the investigation.
So by combining these, you hopefully get a much more complete, more nuanced, well-rounded understanding than you would sticking to just one discipline.
That's the goal. It's about recognizing that complex human questions rarely fit neatly into just one academic box.
Okay. Finally, the document wraps up with an appendix on common research errors. Sounds like a very useful checklist for anyone trying to do rigorous work or even just trying to evaluate information critically. What are some of the key mistakes highlighted there?
Yeah, that appendix is like a greatest hits of what not to do. It covers a lot of ground. It highlights things we've touched on, like having a central research issue that's just too vague or ambiguous.
Right, the starting point again.
Exactly. Or asking research questions that don't really align with your main issue, or maybe not even clearly stating your goals for the research in the first place. It also points out basic misunderstandings about different research methods using the wrong tool for the job.
Okay.
And letting your own biases or expectations lead you to find what you wanted to find, the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy trap.
Ah, confirmation bias.
That kind of thing. Plus, worldview biases, especially when working across cultures.
We already talked about some mistakes in using precedent research, like just summarizing instead of evaluating or proof texting. Does the appendix add more there?
It does. It reminds researchers to avoid things like treating findings from decades ago as if they're still current without checking, or being selective in the research you review, only picking studies that support your hypothesis and ignoring ones that don't.
Selective reading.
Yeah. Also, misinterpreting what previous studies actually found, maybe oversimplifying them, and, as we said, evaluating studies based on the author's fame rather than the quality. Plus, failing to use that review to properly justify your own research question or define its scope.
Got it. And what about errors when you're actually out there collecting the data?
Oh yeah, plenty of potential pitfalls there too. The appendix mentions stuff like asking leading questions in interviews or surveys that basically push people towards a certain answer. The fact that people might behave differently just because they know they're part of a study that's reactivity. Inconsistent data collection procedures, focusing on tiny details with misplaced precision while ignoring bigger flaws in the overall approach.
Like fiddling while Rome burns research style?
Sort of. And relying on case studies that might be interesting but aren't really representative or typical of the broader group you're interested in. Instrument errors, too, like a poorly designed questionnaire.
Wow, it sounds like there are a lot of ways research can go wrong.
There certainly are. It requires real diligence. But the document suggests, and I think it's right, that keeping a laser focus on that well-defined central research issue and maintaining a strong sense of integrity throughout the process can help you anticipate and avoid many of these common problems.
So that integrity piece seems to run through everything.
It really does. From how you define your question to how you treat previous work, how you gather data, how you report it, it all comes back to honesty and rigor.
Okay, so pulling this all together, even though the document's title is Missiological Research Design, which might sound, very specific, niche even. These core ideas we've talked about, asking clear questions, carefully evaluating information, choosing the right methods, analyzing your findings rigorously, and approaching the whole thing with integrity, these seem universally applicable.
Absolutely. They're relevant for anyone who wants to learn effectively and understand things more deeply, whatever the topic.
So the next time you, the listener, are trying to get your head around some complex issue, or maybe you're just faced with a big pile of articles or reports, think about these principles. How can you use that idea of a central research issue to focus your exploration? How can you look at the information you find with a more critical, more analytical eye, like we discussed with precedent research?
It's about being more intentional, more structured in your learning.
Right. Understanding even just basically how good research is designed can make you a much more effective learner and definitely a more discerning consumer of information, whatever you're reading or hearing.
It really empowers you.
Yeah. So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with.
Okay.
Consider how those seemingly simple acts really clearly defining the core question you're trying to answer and then thoughtfully, critically evaluating what you already think you know or what others are telling you. How could that transform the way you approach everyday challenges or the way you pursue learning something new?
It's a powerful framework, isn't it? It goes way beyond just academic papers. It's about clear thinking.